Have you ever stopped to think about how much our public life, maybe even our tastes, our choices, are shaped by forces we don't always see?
It's a really big question and perfect for this deep insight dialogue we're having, because that's exactly what Edward Bernays explored way back in 1928 in his book Propaganda.
Right, propaganda, a word that carries a lot of weight today.
It really does.
Yeah.
But Bernays, well, he used it differently, not as a negative term, but more analytically, almost like an honest and practical manual, for
Oh.
understanding how public opinion actually works.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our mission today is to dig into Bernays' really quite bold ideas. How society functions, how opinions get formed, and maybe most importantly, why understanding these, well, often invisible mechanisms is so critical for you listening now to navigate the world we live in.
It's a world saturated with information, isn't it?
Absolutely. So Bernays kicks things off with a pretty striking statement, doesn't he?
He certainly does. He says, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society.
Wow. Manipulation is important for democracy.
Exactly. He argues that the people who do this form a kind of invisible government. But, and this is key, he didn't necessarily see it as sinister.
Not sinister. How so?
He saw it more as a logical result of how societies have to operate. I mean, for huge numbers of people to cooperate and live together in a smoothly functioning society, you need some kind of organization, some direction. That was his perspective.
So structure requires guidance, in a way.
Precisely. And what's fascinating is his description of these invisible governors. They're not some secret club. He says many are unaware of the identity of their fellow members.
So how do they govern then?
Through, well, natural leadership, the
Ah.
ability to come up with ideas, and holding key positions in society's structure. Think about political parties. They weren't in the U.S. Constitution, but popped up almost instantly.
Right, to manage the chaos.
Kind of. Imagine voters facing, like, dozens or hundreds of candidates. It'd be overwhelming. Parties narrow it down, saving people from having to research abstruse economic, political, and ethical data for every single one.
So society sort of agrees to this simplification.
That's Bernays' point. Society consents to have its choice narrowed to the ideas and products brought forward by this process. Otherwise, economic and social life would just get hopelessly jammed. Imagine having to test every single product yourself.
Okay, I see the logic there. But still, that word manipulation, it brings up images of, manipulation of news, the inflation personality, and the general ballyhoo, as he puts it.
He acknowledges that. He knows these tools can be misused, but his fundamental argument is that despite that risk, this kind of organization, this focusing of public opinion, is actually necessary to orderly life.
Interesting. So this need for organization wasn't always so complex.
Well, as civilization grew more complex, the need for this invisible government, as he calls it, grew too. And this directly spurred the invention of the tools needed to manage opinion on a mass scale.
You mean communication technology?
Exactly. The technical means by which opinion may be regimented. Think printing press, newspapers, then railroads, the telegraph, telephone, radio, airplanes. Suddenly, ideas could shoot across America rapidly and even instantaneously. It was a total game changer.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning H.G. Wells sensing this.
Right. Wells saw the vast potentialities, especially for quickly sending out directive strategic or technical conceptions and getting fast replies and effective discussion. It just shrunk the world communication-wise.
And broke down old barriers.
Totally. It shifted the whole structure of society. Before, the village was the main unit, opinions formed face-to-face. But now, people with shared interests could be grouped, regimented for common action, even if they were thousands of miles apart.
You give some examples of this, right?
Oh yeah, loads. He talks about the sheer multitude of cleavages, everything from the League to abolish capital punishment to the National Pickle Packers Association, each with its own magazine or way of reaching members. It shows this incredibly complex, intertwining structure of groupings.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The idea that individuals belong to multiple groups.
Yes, his John Jones example.
Mm-hmm.
John isn't just a Rotarian, he's also in a church, a fraternal order, a political party.
So an idea he picks up in one group.
Can then disseminate in the other groups in which he may have influence. It creates this ripple effect of persuasion, often completely unseen.
Which brings us back to that loaded word, propaganda.
Right. Bernays really had to tackle its negative image head-on. He pointed to the dictionary definition, Funk and Wagnalls at the time. Effort directed systematically toward the gaining of public support for an opinion or a course of action.
Just a systematic effort.
He argued that meaning is perfectly legitimate. It only turns vicious and reprehensible, he said, if people are spreading deliberate lies or aiming for things prejudicial to the common good.
So he saw it as a neutral tool.
Essentially, yes, a necessary function in a complex world. He even quotes the Scientific American pleading for the word to be restored to respectable usage after it got that sinister complexion during the war.
And he saw it happening all around him, even in everyday news.
Absolutely. He pointed to 1928 New York Times headlines, things like, 12 nations warn China real reform must come, or our living standard highest in history, says Hoover report.
Those sound like standard news headlines.
On the surface, yes. But Bernays saw them as conscious direction given to events. The State Department stating its position, the Carnegie Foundation publicizing Dr. Pritchett's views on Zionism, these were intentional efforts to shape public opinion.
So his definition of modern propaganda
Was a consistent, enduring effort to create or shape events to influence the relations of the public to an enterprise, idea, or group. It's everywhere, it's ongoing, and it works to regiment the public mind.
And the war really highlighted its power.
Massively. The astounding success of propaganda during the war, he wrote, really opened the eyes of the intelligent few to what was possible. Governments used visuals, audio, everything, and crucially, they got the cooperation of the key men in every group.
Tapping into those group structures again.
Exactly. This new propaganda understands the anatomy of society, those interlocking group formations and loyalties. It sees the individual not just as one person, but as a cell organized into the social unit.
You mentioned these invisible governors, but Bernays goes further, calling them new propagandists, almost invisible rulers. That sounds powerful
Yeah.
and maybe a bit concerning.
It does sound powerful. His argument is that their influence is often indirect, but it's everywhere. He gives some really vivid examples.
Like what?
Like Irene Castle, a famous socialite back then. Apparently, she started the trend for short hair among fashionable women just by doing it herself. Huge impact.
One person setting a national trend.
Seems so. Or think about men's fashion. A gentleman tailor in London could influence styles all the way over into Pica. He also mentions a silk maker getting shoe companies interested in silk-covered shoes just by convincing a popular actress to wear them first. Creates a whole new demand through suggestion.
Wow. And the modern term for this kind of expert?
Bernays called them the Public Relations Council.
Public relations.
Yeah. And their job, he said, is twofold. Interpreting enterprises and ideas to the public, and also interpreting the public to promulgators. Basically, advisors for public interaction, like lawyers, but for public perception.
So how do they work, according to Bernays? What's the process?
It's quite systematic. First, they analyze the client's problems. Crucially, they need to check if the client's offering is actually basically unsound. His example, an orphan asylum getting bad press because it wasn't using the modern cottage plan.
So, fix the substance first.
Right. Second, analyze the public. Figure out the target groups. Find their leaders, social leaders, economic, geographic, cultural leaders.
I understand who you're talking to.
Exactly. Third, formulate policies. Basically, shape what the client does so it actually earns public interest and approval. And fourth, figure out the best means of communication. Conversations, speeches, radio, newspapers, you name it.
And this whole profession, PR, it had specific origins.
It did. Bernays traces it partly to the insurance scandals and the general muckraking of corporations early in the 20th century. Companies suddenly realized they were totally out of touch with the public.
Ouch.
Yeah. They needed expert advice on how to understand people and explain themselves better. He uses Metropolitan Life Insurance as an example. They made a conscious, directed effort, offered health surveys, advice, even made their headquarters a picturesque landmark, all to build goodwill.
Okay, so it arose from a need to connect or maybe reconnect with the public. But what about the ethics of influencing people like this?
A very important point, and Bernays addressed it. He talked about the pragmatic ideal, helping the producer understand the public and vice versa, aiming to eliminate the waste and the friction, like phone companies explaining why they used exchange names, just making things smoother.
And a code of conduct.
Yes. He argued PR counsels should have an ethical code, like lawyers or doctors. They should refuse dishonest clients, fraudulent products, or causes that were antisocial. Why? Because, as he put it, he is not dissociated from the client in the public's mind. Their reputations are linked.
Makes sense.
And he stressed candor. His business is not to fool or hoodwink the public. He believed propaganda material should always be clearly labeled as to source.
So transparency was key for him,
Oh.
ideally. Let's look at where this gets applied. Bernays shows it's not just one sector, right? It's everywhere. Business, for example.
Oh, hugely in business. Mass production flipped the script. It wasn't just demand creating supply anymore. Supply had to actively create demand.
Leading to more competition.
Fierce competition, and not just brand X versus brand Y. He talks about the new competition between whole industries. His phrase, the great war on the dining room table, prunes fighting oranges for breakfast space. Or plumbing versus textiles, because better heating meant people wore lighter clothes indoors.
That's a fascinating way to look at it.
Yeah.
So how did this new salesmanship work?
It wasn't about the hard sell. It was about removing sales resistance by creating circumstances. The classic example he gives is selling pianos.
Right, not just saying, buy this piano.
Exactly.
Huh.
Instead, the propagandist or PR council would create a desire for a music room. Maybe organize exhibitions of beautifully designed music rooms, get famous decorators involved, invite key people, a society leader, a famous violinist to a launch event, influence architects to include music rooms in their plans.
So the idea to buy a piano.
Will come to him as his own idea. Much more effective. Another example was the ivory soap sculpture contest for kids.
Soap sculpture.
Yeah. Nationwide contest, sponsored by an art center, schools encouraged participation. It tapped into all sorts of motives, creativity, competition, even snob appeal and maternal pride. Suddenly, soap wasn't just soap. It was tied to her children's creativity, a matter of personal and intimate interest.
Clever. Okay, what about politics? You mentioned politicians were lagging behind business.
Bernays thought so. He felt they often used archaic and ineffective methods. The big challenge, he said, was the great political problem. Should leaders lead public opinion or just follow it?
And he thought they should lead.
Definitely. A statesman needs to sway the public, not just react. If you have, say, a low-tariff platform, don't just give speeches on the radio.
What else?
Create circumstances. Stage exhibitions showing how tariffs affect everyday prices, get prominent people on board, maybe even organize something dramatic like prominent men boycott woolen clothes to highlight the issue. Get the public keyed to a certain pitch of interest before you make the big speech.
Any real-world examples?
He mentions Thomas Masaryk when he was provisional president of Czechoslovakia. Masaryk apparently changed their Independence Day celebration from a Sunday to a Monday.
Why?
To ensure better press coverage worldwide. Mondays meant more space in the papers. Bernays called it making history for the cables. Really strategic thinking.
That is shrewd. Okay, not just business and politics, social service too.
Absolutely. Social causes depend on voluntary support, right? So they need propaganda to overcome inertia, people's resistance to change, or just apathy.
How would that work?
He gives the NAACP's anti-lynching campaign as a prime example. They deliberately held a major convention in Atlanta right in the South.
Bold move.
It gave their message greater authority coming from there. And crucially, they involved local Southern leaders, ministers who were already working for better race relations. This slowly shifted opinions, even among Southern newspaper editors. It made the topic discussable where it hadn't been before. It created a public, organized push.
So changing the environment to change minds. He also touches on education, art, and science.
Briefly, yes. Education needs propaganda to get public support and interest. College news bureaus publicizing research, like a Harvard professor solving the Mayan Venus calendar, that's propaganda in his view, promoting the value of the institution and its work.
And art.
Art galleries use associational values. He mentions Cheney Brothers silk exhibiting designs inspired by a French ironworker at the Louvre to help mold the public taste and elevate the brand.
Linking art and commerce.
And science benefits too, both in marketing new inventions and just making the public generally more receptive to change and progress.
So these methods are applied across the board. Let's talk about the tools themselves and the mechanics of persuasion beyond just newspapers.
Oh yeah, there's a multitude of other avenues. Newspapers themselves changed. Initially, they kind of resented propaganda, but then they started prioritizing news value. So the Smart PR Council learned to create some of the day's events, things that would naturally qualify as news.
Making news happen. What else?
Magazines often act as propagandist organs for certain ideas. Like an expert from a bank's women's department writing an article on investment for a women's magazine, promoting the bank's expertise indirectly.
Radio.
Huge potential, reaching millions of persons simultaneously. This led to what Bernays called sugar-coated sales messages, entertainment that subtly includes advertising. He mentions the Dodge Victory 6 car launch featuring huge stars like Al Jolson and Will Rogers, reaching maybe 30 million Americans with entertainment that was also a massive ad.
Movies, too.
He called the motion picture the greatest unconscious carrier of propaganda. Think about how movies standardize ideas, habits, fashion, just by showing them on screen. They reflect popular trends, but also shape them.
And individual personalities.
Still incredibly important. The vivid dramatization of personality, he said, will always remain one of the functions of the Public Relations Council. Using famous people, but doing it smartly. He contrasts the Prince of Wales' poorly handled American tour with a single, well-publicized subway ride he took, which generated enormous goodwill. Strategy matters.
It really feels like he saw this everywhere. But he also notes the public is becoming aware of the methods.
Yes, he acknowledged that. But his conclusion wasn't that propaganda would fade away. Quite the opposite. He stated firmly, propaganda will never die out.
So what does this all mean? Where does that leave us, especially today?
Well, Bernays' final point was quite forward-looking. He argued that intelligent men must realize that propaganda is the modern instrument by which they can fight for productive ends and help to bring order out of chaos.
So understanding it isn't about being helpless against it.
Not at all. It's about engaging with it intelligently, understanding the mechanisms, being critical, but also recognizing it as a tool that can be used ethically for good outcomes.
Okay. So to recap, propaganda, and the way Bernays originally defined it, isn't just some sinister plot. It's a fundamental, maybe even necessary, part of how complex societies organize themselves in business, politics, social movements, everywhere.
Exactly. And that really brings us to the final thought for you listening now. If propaganda, in this broad sense, is indeed here to stay, and we know it's constantly evolving with technology, what new forms is it taking in our world? This incredibly connected, information-heavy world.
Good question. How do we spot it?
And perhaps more importantly, how can we, as informed citizens, not just discern its influence, but maybe even ethically use similar principles of communication for positive goals? How do we avoid just being passive cells in the social unit, unaware of that invisible government and its executive arm, as Bernays put it?
Definitely something to think about long after this deep insight dialogue ends.